Alright guys, thanks for tuning back in. So this video, it's kind of a request. Apparently there's still a lot of confusion about the critical system, and seeing as there's been recent changes, I decided to go ahead and make a video explaining what the current system is a little bit, or at least the parts that are still applicable to the new system, as well as what the new changes are going to do. So on the live server right now, as a stat, critical is going to check against the enemy target's critical rating. So if you have two characters with 1,250 critical rating, which provides a 50% critical chance at level 230, neither of those two targets are going to be able to critically hit one another. Now, this is just because that there's no way to kind of bypass the critical defense system when it comes to a rating versus another rating of the same type. So the new change brought into consideration a new stat called critical defense. So what that means is your critical rating is now going to check against critical defense, and whatever is left over from your rating is what is applied as a rating that calculates into your percentage chance to critically hit the target. So right now your critical rating is only increased by the stat sense. On the live server right now, you also get a small amount of critical rating from concentration. The only other ways in Pegasus right now, in version 116, to get critical rating is through passives and item bonus effects that add critical percentage, and that's it. Maybe, you have your stats and your gems, which I just consider as part of item bonuses. You have your build, and then you have your stat build, then you have your skill build for the passives, and then you have your itemization, which is your equipment and the stats that apply, or the gems and enchantments that apply to those items. Critical defense, though, is actually generated from charm. I thought this was kind of a weird thing. I don't personally agree that it should be charm. I think it should be concentration, because as it stands right now, strength will give you attack power increase with certain weapons. It'll give you unarmed attack power increase as well, and then it'll also increase your maximum health points, your defense, and your maximum weight carry. And inadvertently, it also increases your health point recovery, because health point recovery as a base is generated from a certain percentage of your maximum health. So because it increases your maximum health, it also increases your HP recovery. Dexterity increases your attack power with certain weapons, as well as unarmed attack power, and then also increases your dodge rate. Now, it doesn't have as many as strength does. However, there's actually a lot of passives that take your dexterity into account that increase other stats, as well as defense being linked to your strength is a constant value, and you can never get 100% damage reduction percentage-wise from just defense. Defense as a sliding scale curve will no longer allow you to do that. Whereas dexterity, if you dodge, you negate 100% damage, which is why it's not always a factor. You're not always dodging attacks, except for in situations where you have very low accuracy going up very high amounts of dodge, then it's going to feel like you never hit. The next stat, intelligence, increases your maximum mana points, your attack power with magic-based weapons, as well as your magic defense, and inadvertently your mana point recovery, because mana point recovery is also based off of a certain percentage of your maximum mana points. Concentration now only affects your attack power with guns and launchers, and as a secondary stat for two-handed bows, and your accuracy. That's it. It will only increase these two things unless you're a crafter, which I don't consider. That's not a battle stat. We're talking about combat stats and what they provide combat-wise. Charm increases your healing amount, your status down amount, and your status up amount. Now, it doesn't seem like a lot, except that there is a buff for every single stat in game, which means that Charm has an effective capability of increasing every single stat that you have. And then you have Sense, which increases attack power by 1 point for every 10 sense you have for all weapons. So that's pretty good. And then it also increases your critical rating. And really that's about it. So if you ask me, the two most underutilized skills or stats in the game is concentration and sense. Dexterity almost kind of fits in there, except for the fact that what dexterity does by adding dodge is such a huge damage negation that you can't really argue that it doesn't have its own equivalent role as, you know, a sliding skill curve for defensive capabilities with maximum health points. So I don't necessarily agree with it, but for now, I guess critical defense is generated from Charm. And that's the only method for now. Other methods, I've already talked with Genesis about this, could come into play later on, such as, you know, gems that apply critical defense, maybe passives, you know, new passives for skills and stuff like that. I'm sensing that the item mall passives that generate critical, there will be a new addition to those that are also going to give critical defense. So you can probably expect the Valor or item mall premium passives to be giving critical defense. There'll probably be gems, and there'll most likely be substats that give critical defense being added in with it, just so that way you can properly itemize and reconstruct your build to take in for critical defense. Right now, every 2 points of Charm gives 1 point of critical defense, and because I don't have any passives or any effects that increase it, you can see that I have 316 Charm, which gives me 158 critical defense. Now, I think that applies at a 1-to-1 ratio of negating critical rating for critical defense. I think it might change later on, but for now in version 116 on Pegasus, I think that's what it goes by. So talking about that system, you have, let's say you have two characters, both of them are equally statted and geared and everything to where they have the exact same amount of critical rating. You're going to end up with a 0% chance to critically hit each other indefinitely. Neither one of you are going to be able to critically hit each other. Now, if you were to have, let's say you were an attacking character and you had 1,250 critical rating, which is a 50% chance, and you went up against a target that has 625 critical rating. Well, after their 625 critical rating is deducted from your 1,250, you're going to have a 25% chance. Now, that kind of led to some instabilities and some unwanted results, such as the person with the highest crit wins, plain and simple, or at least in terms of who's going to be applying critical hits. With the new system, critical rating actually gets checked against critical defense. So if you have, in the first example, the same two characters both have 1,250 or a 50% chance to critically hit each other, both people are now going to be hitting each other with a 50% chance to critically hit. If you're an offensive character, as in the second example I had given, and you have 1,250 critical rating, and your enemy has 625 critical rating, you're going to have a 50% chance to critically hit them, and they're going to have a 25% chance to critically hit you. Now, That is if both of those characters have 0 critical defense. If you have 1,250 going against 0, you're going to have a 50% chance to critically hit that person because they lack all critical defense. However, if you have 1,250 critical rating and you're going against an enemy who has 625 critical defense, now you're only going to have a 25% chance to critically hit them. So, in looking back on it, it's a good system because now it takes into account that you can build a defense against critical hits while keeping your capabilities of critically hitting an enemy as long as they didn't outgear you in critical defense. I think it's pretty cool that you can't negate 100% of your enemy's capability to critically hit you with critical defense. However, at the same time, I feel that it being based off of a stat in a 2-to-1 ratio, whereas your critical is generated on a 1-to-1 ratio at minimum, I think that there should definitely be some considerations for really gearing into it, which I'm pretty sure will be done. So hopefully that kind of clears up everything that's going on with the critical system. I didn't realize there was actually such a heavy focus on just that stat alone. I'd kind of figured, you know, a lot of people were just concerned about it for game balance sake. This update, it doesn't really affect person versus monster combat at all, because monsters already lack pretty much all forms of critical, and them getting critical defense seems unlikely. For example, I mean, I have a pretty good critical rating on this artisan. I have 735, which is about around 29.35% against enemies of the same level as me. But if you look at, like, for example, my hunter summon, the critical on it is only 168. So getting like a 7-to-1 ratio where my summons adapt only 1/7 of the critical that I have, it makes it so they almost never critically hit. And I think that's kind of bogus, considering, like, as a character, I can actually increase the amount of damage I deal on a critical hit, while summons don't. You don't really have a way to specialize your summons at all. And as you can see, it has 0 critical defense. So it adapted absolutely none of the critical defense that I have. So it doesn't really affect person versus monster combat. It doesn't really affect summons. This seems strictly like a change that PvP players would want to take into account. And if you're just doing dungeons and PvM, then you don't really have very much to worry about. So hopefully that kind of covers, the questions and hesitation, maybe concerns about the system. I think it's good overall, as long as the critical rating system between classes that can build into critical and classes that can't. For example, mages cannot build critical at all very well. I mean, they have no passives other than the item mall and valor options for critical. They don't have any skills that increase their critical chance or their critical damage, and itemization for them is really, really poor in forms of critical damage. And then if you contrast that against, say, like an axe champion, I can still hit thousands, multiple thousands of critical rating on an axe champion, even though I'm a PvM player. That does me absolutely no good to go beyond 1,250 when I'm fully buffed. It still kind of shows that high level of difference between a class that can build and a class that can't build into critical chances. I think that margin should be reduced, but You know, apparently that's just my opinion, and if I wanted to actually kind of apply some game logic to it, you know, critical, it's not what people really think of in terms of like static combat or statistical combat situations. You know, I think that it's a lucky hit that it just impacts harder, or it hits a soft spot. It's kind of like a luck strike. You know, you aim and you hit like normal, but every once in a while you land a blow squarely on the target, and it just has that extra oomph to it, that extra boom. And I think that all classes should be capable of utilizing this, especially in person versus monster combat. I think that with proper itemization and everything, without too heavy of an investment, I think that it should be, you know, something that you definitely take into account. But I think that without too heavy of an investment, you should be able to properly use this, which on my Artisan I've managed to do fairly well. In fact, I can actually get this quite a bit better. But just that contrast between classes, I think, is something that should be looked into in the future balances for the game. So hopefully this answers everybody's questions. If not, feel free to leave comments on the YouTube channel. Feel free to leave comments on the forum post that I'm going to be linking this to, or even just sending me, you know, private messages on the forums or whispers in game. Thanks for tuning in.